Hello, thank you for tuning into the Natural Health Rising podcast. My name is Rachel Smith. I am a certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and I've helped hundreds of people naturally reverse symptoms of autoimmune diseases and other health challenges, from digestive issues to hormone imbalances. And in these weekly episodes, you're going to learn from myself and top health experts from around the world about functional medicine and holistic health tips to help you rise to your healthiest, happiest self. Hello. Do not skip this intro. I repeat, do not skip this intro because I'm going to give you even more tips before you dive into this episode. And they are actually really important because we did not get to talk about them, my guest and I, in this episode. And if you've been listening to my podcast or following me on social media for a while, you most likely have heard me talk about mold illness and the dangers of mold. And this is for many reasons, like why I'm so passionate about this topic and why I work with people who have this. It's because mold played a role in my personal health challenges and my loved ones' health challenges. And I often find it as the hidden root cause for so many of my clients. And a lot of times this is my clients who have been to 2, 3, 4, 5 different healthcare practitioners, functional medicine doctors, naturopaths. They've done all the things, yet they're still experiencing health problems. And I mean, within me just asking them a few questions, I can very quickly tell if somebody is dealing with mold. And now I've helped many clients get mold out of their bodies and reverse symptoms of autoimmune diseases because of this, to get rid of chronic pancreatitis, chronic headaches, hormone problems, and so on. So I think that this is a really, really important thing for people to understand. However, although you've heard me talk about this a few times probably, this is the first time I've been able to deliver this type of information about mold inspection and how to address mold in your environment. And today I am talking to a true expert in the field of mold inspection and mold remediation or removal. Honestly, even I learned some very interesting things today that I know for a fact you will find extremely valuable, that you can take with you for the rest of your lives and apply it to every single place you live in, including your current home. And you can take action on this stuff today. So something that we didn't get to touch on in this episode is how mycotoxins, or the mold toxins, can actually be carried with you when you move to a new location. So here's an example. Let's say you find out that you have mold in your home or apartment, and this is making you or another one of your family members or loved ones very sick. Remediation, or the removal of mold from your place, is very costly. And also, if you live in an apartment, a lot of times you can't control this, so you won't be able to remediate the mold. You'll have to move into a new place. So instead of removing the mold, remediating, you decide to move. But when you do so, you're taking your belongings with you, right? The tricky part is that those belongings are almost confirmed that they are going to be very contaminated with mold and toxins. So what do you do? Well, you could buy all new belongings, which would be the absolute best thing, honestly. Now, this is a bit crazy though, right? It's going to cost you a lot of money. But sometimes if the exposure was bad enough, you should consider getting new items of things that are porous, things like your bedding, your furniture, those porous items where the toxins can actually really get into. Versus something that is, let's say, a desk that's hard that you can physically clean, that would be a different story. Another option is to have an expert come and fog your home. Now, it's important that you use the right fogging mixture. Brandon, today's guest, he was telling me something offline after we finished recording the episode about like a hydrogen peroxide and commercial grade vinegar mixture that he would use to fog with. So you would want to make sure that you hire somebody like Brandon who knows what they're doing, is going to use the right mixture. And this mixture specifically has something to do with being able to get into some of those porous materials as well. There are also some other products out there that you can use for yourself to help with these things. I've personally used a company called Microbalance to help clean some of my belongings. I'd really love it if you specifically use the link in the show notes if you're going to go look up Microbalance, because this actually helps support the podcast and all the hard work that I put into this show for you guys. But the thing I like about Microbalance is that they are non-toxic products and they're really easy to use. And there's a couple things I would recommend. The one product I would recommend getting is their laundry cleaner, because again, your clothing is going to pick up the mold and mold toxins as well and bring them into that new environment. And all of our clothing are porous, right? You also could consider some of their foggers, their sprays, candles, and other items. Now, I still definitely recommend hiring someone as amazing as Brandon to come take care of your needs. But if you want a backup option or you want to get some of their products, that's my recommendation. And I do also really like the second products that I really like is that they have nasal sprays, nose sprays, nasal rinse options. Anybody who has had mold exposure should look into this and use this, because we do breathe in the mycotoxins. And this is why people get headaches, sinus issues, and allergies, because these toxins are going into the sinuses. You need to actually kill those and clear those out properly. So go check out this company by heading to the link in the show notes. And you will also learn about ways to prevent mold in your home in this episode. And I think that what we talk about in this episode makes the absolute most sense, is the way to go. And everybody needs to listen to this to understand how to prevent mold, because you'll hear how Brandon explains how every home has mold to a certain extent. And it's only a matter of time until that mold becomes like overgrown and toxic pretty much. And you'll learn about why that is. However, we don't need to just worry about the mold environmentally in the home, but there are actually a lot of other pollutants from things like our home furnishings, so carpeting, furniture, the paint on the walls. These things can actually off-gas pollutants, and then we inhale them. And this off-gassing is happening on a constant basis at a very low level that we're constantly being exposed to. Unless you built your home and added furnishings and paints and carpetings and all these things, going with a very non-toxic route, and you know about all of that stuff and how to pick the right products that are non-toxic, then you most likely are being exposed to these things. So to support having cleaner air, I recommend that you add in some hypo air purification systems throughout your home, or even use their whole home HVAC unit if you own your home. So their products actually can kill viruses and bacteria on surfaces, and they're effective against other allergens, fine particulates, formaldehyde, air pollution, and other chemical gases. You can find a link to them as well in the show notes. And what's great is that I have a discount code for them. So it's Natural Health Rising, and you can save an additional 10% on any of their products. And they're always doing really amazing deals, especially around Black Friday and Labor Day and Christmas and all these holidays. And you can actually always stack that discount code with their sales. So you can sometimes get up to like 30% or more off of their products. And if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to send me an email, or a message on Instagram is a really good way to contact me. And my Instagram is at Natural Health Rising. I also want to quickly remind you that if you are experiencing mold illness and you're looking for a functional medicine practitioner to help you heal on your mold illness journey, then please reach out to me, because this is a large population of the clients that I work with. Okay, now for today's incredible guest, Brandon Faust. So Brandon is a visionary owner and founder of Mold Solutions, an industry-leading indoor air quality company specializing in top-tier remediation, atomized sanitization, and duct cleaning services. Driven by a personal journey rooted in his commitment to health and healing, Brandon's dedication stems from witnessing his own family struggle with unexplained chronic illness. With a heartfelt mission to address these widespread health concerns, he has become a beacon of hope for countless individuals in search of answers. In an astonishingly short span of just 1.5 years, Brandon has propelled Mold Solutions from a dynamic startup to a thriving enterprise, boasting a highly skilled team of 15 dedicated staff members. Brandon's exceptional accomplishments and unwavering commitment has garnered well-deserved recognition. In 2021, he was honored with the prestigious Inc. 5000 award and propelled the company to an impressive number 377 ranking on the list. Welcome to the show, Brandon.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. And, I was looking at everything that you've already done and the type of topics that you cover. And it's definitely right along the lines of stuff that I have a strong connection with. So I'm grateful that you're having me on the phone, on the show.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you because for two reasons. One, mold problems are near to my heart because I've had a lot of health problems because of living in moldy places. And also, I deal with a lot of clients who we wind up finding mold on their test results, and that has a massive impact on their health. And you have your own story about your family and yourself going through some chronic health problems prior to starting Mold Solutions. So I would love to hear a little bit more about what was happening at that time in your life.
Absolutely. So my first, basically running into mold, my wife actually wanted to get a mold test when we moved to Florida.
Mhm.
And initially I was like, I'm not interested. Why would we do that? I'm from the West Coast. It just didn't make sense to me. And lo and behold, I really should have done that. And I think everybody should do that. But at the time, I kind of blew it off, didn't want to pay the extra expense for another inspection after all the different inspections and costs for buying a new home, you
Mhm.
know. And then she was pregnant at the time. And fast forward a little bit, and a buddy of mine asked me to get involved with his, new venture that he was taking on. He was going to start running a mold company. And initially I turned him down. And then he said, well, look, there's equity involved if you want to get involved. So I said, okay, well, that sounds a little bit more exciting to me. And I started doing the training, certification, etc. Fast forward a few more months, my son is born. A month into it, he starts waking up, almost having like an asthma attack, struggling to breathe. And this happened 3 days in a row. So
Mm.
for us, she was definitely freaking out. I was starting to freak out, but I said, look, before we take him to the emergency room, I just want to see if there's anything environmental that could be occurring because of the training and certification I just been, involved in. So I started looking, and I got into the room where the air conditioning unit, the air handler was located, the furnace. And I moved this one shelving system, and there was 2 feet of mold growing up it and then 2 feet
Mm.
wide. So it was a huge amount of mold on this one shelving system on the back of it, hidden. And it was because of a leak that we didn't know about. My mom had come to visit because of the baby, and she was taking a shower every day, of course, and there was a pinhole leak. So whenever she was showering, water was just kind of coming down the wall and then wicking up the furniture. And it being in the same room where the air handler was located, it was then taking that moldy air in that toxic full air and distributing it throughout the entire house. So once we handled the leak, removed the contaminated material, and did a whole home sanitization, the next day he slept an hour longer and he had no trouble breathing.
Wow.
So that was really my first moment where I was like, oh wow, this is actually important. This is something that can make a difference in people's lives. And it definitely made me more thorough in regards to the environmental consultations that I was doing and the inspections that I was doing and looking in places that mold would want to hide. And then
Mhm.
fast forward a couple years, and I was sick. I was getting a fever every month. I was fatigued. I was waking up with joint pain. I
Mm.
had a pain in my chest that would not go away. Like, it was crazy how it was just like this constant pain. And I was taking a supplement, Spanish black radish. It was the only thing that was basically kind of giving me any sort of relief at all. It's like a drainage supplement.
Mhm.
And I thought it might be mold related. And I ended up doing a mycotoxin test from a company called Great Plains Laboratory. So myco is the Greek word for fungus, toxin, something poisonous. So it's a simple urine test, and I came back like off the charts. Like high was 5 to 50, and I was at 1,240 or something like that. Like I was like,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought it might be from going into other people's moldy homes because I didn't smell anything, I didn't see anything. There was no indication, and I was even a little bit suspicious. I popped a baseboard in my master bedroom. There was nothing there. So I thought I was in a safe zone. And then 6 months later, that same AC overflowed through the condensation drain backing up. And I had continuous flooring in my home. So I was removing it and replacing it. And I get to the master bedroom and I pop a baseboard, and there's a toxic mold called Chaetomium that was behind the baseboards. So the one area I looked in, it wasn't, but 3/4 of the room it was. And then I decided to open up the walls, and sure enough, it was 2 feet of mold, a mold called Aspergillus penicillium, right? They classify it as the same mold because they can't tell the difference. So I had these two molds fighting it out in my bedroom where I thought it was a safe zone, and it was actually a biological warfare zone. And these mycotoxins, because they are so tiny, get pulled through the nooks and crannies and crevices and the gaps where it's not properly sealed. And then you are inhaling it throughout the night, or I was inhaling it throughout the night. And
Mm-hmm.
within 3 weeks of finding this and removing it, all my symptoms went away. And interesting enough, I just recently did another mycotoxin test with that same company. They now changed their name to Mosaic Diagnostics, I believe.
Yeah.
And all my levels had tremendously dropped, although I am a little bit high in a couple mycotoxins, but it probably comes along with the territory because I'm constantly in moldy homes. And even though I'm wearing a mask, the
Mm-hmm.
masks only do so much, in terms of protection. So yeah, that's basically, how I became so passionate about it, and really knowing that this was something that made a difference in people's lives, which is something that I feel really connected with. It's important to me that if I'm going to do something, I'm helping people.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing that you had the tools and knowledge to be able to go investigate this stuff and figure it out in that time frame. Because a lot of people out there don't even know about this, which is why we're doing this podcast episode to educate everybody. Um, can you share a little bit more about what else mold can do to our health?
Well, look, the scope is wide
Mhm.
because it's going to impact where your immune system is weakest. And some of the aspects of it, there's different, syndromes that they've called it now. It's like mast cell activation syndrome, or chronic inflammation response syndrome, or CIRS or CMAS. And they have these different labels for it, but ultimately, when you're taking in a foreign invader into the body, right? Similar to like if you get bit by a mosquito or stung by a bee, what happens, right? And for some people, it can be really like if they have an allergic reaction, their whole hand or body part can swell up massively. For other people, it might just be some redness and some swelling. Well, similar to that, what's happening? They're taking in a foreign invader, and the histamines they start releasing. So that's where you get that chronic inflammation response syndrome or mast cell activation syndrome, where that histamine release is intense. So depending on each individual and what their allergies might be, similar to somebody who, for some people, penicillin, that antibiotic, which derives from the mold, penicillin, it can be a lifesaver because it is fighting, it's what is it? It's an antibiotic, anti-life,
Mhm.
right? And it's letting out enough stuff to kill the bacteria, but for some people, it can actually kill the person if they have an allergic reaction to it. So
Mhm.
similarly, each person is going to have their own, response. And depending on, for some people, they might even have a genetic gene deficiency or mutation that prevents them from being able to detox the same way. And it could be a lot more difficult for them to heal than for other people. I think it's about 20-25% of the population that has that gene mutation, if
Mhm.
you will. So, but what am I hearing about on a, daily basis? Headaches, joint aches, upper respiratory issues like asthma type reactions. Um, they rashes, hives. When I was just traveling and I was in UK, I walked into a hotel room and it was so musty that I was like, I can't stay here. I was in there for 10 minutes and an hour later, my arms were itching and,
Hmm.
I was like having an allergic reaction, and so maybe for somebody they could sleep in there and they would be okay. But for me, I definitely had a reaction, so it is different from person to person. And I mean, you can even have like mood swings, depression, mental issues that come along with it. There's a neurodisruptor aspect of mold
Hmm.
in the mycotoxins because they're so tiny and it does impact they have a natural affinity to the most fatty part of the body, which is the brain for many people. And it interrupts that communication that is supposed to take place. So you have a lot of times, if you look at like the mycotox profile from the Mosaic, and it's talking about what it's linked to, I mean, you have things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, even cancer. So I think that mold toxicity, mold exposure is one of the most underestimated and underdiagnosed causes of physical ailments in the world today. I mean, that's my viewpoint on it. And this is coming from somebody who, when I first moved to Florida 7 years ago, like most guys, honestly, just blew it off. It's not a big deal, and
Hmm.
sure enough, it absolutely is.
Hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. I've seen with my clients, I've seen some really crazy things improve by identifying mold and helping them get it out of their body. I've seen clients, a couple clients with chronic pancreatitis restore their pancreas function from getting rid of mold. Lots of autoimmune diseases going into remission, like scleroderma and lupus and Hashimoto's. Like it's so wild how many things are out there. And like you said, it can manifest as a variety of illnesses, symptoms, and so on. But outside of health symptoms, what about inside of an environment? How can people start to identify if they have mold? Are there certain signs that they should look for?
Well, one thing I tell people, number one, if it's musty, it's moldy.
Hmm.
That's just kind of sort of your first thing. If it is musty, it is moldy. Now, with that said, just because it's not musty doesn't mean that it's not moldy. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Because you just need to know that yes, it's getting enough water, it's actually germinating, it's sporulating, it's releasing the the microbial volatile organic compounds when it's got enough water. It's going through its cycle of repopulating, growing in different places. But just because you're not smelling something doesn't mean that it's not there. Just like in my master bedroom, I had no real indication that there was an issue. It was just how I was feeling that was the biggest indication that there was an issue somewhere in close proximity to me, because it had been 6 months of problems that were mysterious. So I think that's one of the things that you need to pay attention to. If you leave your home for a week and all of a sudden some of the things that are your normal chronic feelings that are not non-optimum, if you leave and those improve, well, there's a good chance it's in your home. There's something going on that is triggering that in your home. So beyond that, I think that it's interesting when I'm talking about UK because I just got back from there, but they don't have the central heating and air conditioning like we do. They have
Right.
radiators, right?
Hmm.
Or whatever they're called. That basically, it's a different system of heating. Let's put it that way.
Hmm.
And in Florida, everybody has central heating and air. Unless you have the wall units, which are really bad too. But in the central heating and air, especially when we're constantly using them and the temperature differential is so high, you get
Mm.
condensation, which means there's a continual source of water, and they're basically like manufacturing plants for mold. And there's a
Hmm.
particular mold called cladosporium that actually thrives in lower temperatures. So it loves the AC unit and the coils and the blower wheel and the box above the furnace or the air handler that connects the ducts to the box. It loves that space because it is cold and wet. But once it starts going and it starts building its colony there, it starts infiltrating and infesting your unit. It can be that mold and that spore and that mycotoxin can be all throughout your house. So you'll
Hmm.
see it like discoloration in the grout, discoloration in the window seals. Most people are like, oh, do I have a leak in my window seal or do I have a leak in my shower? And in some cases they may, but the majority of the time it's actually the condensation and where it's wet, especially when you have a shift in temperature and it gets cooler and drier outside for the 3 months here in Florida where that happens, where it actually will start colonizing in any place where there's moisture buildup. And that does happen around, December, January, February, where it gets cooler and drier. And that moisture that's been building up in the house is now trying to get outside, or the actual material itself is hitting dew point. So water droplets are now collecting on it, but it's been building up. The source is actually in the air conditioning unit where it's been building up for the last however many months and potentially years.
Is there a way that somebody can prevent that from happening or the mold from colonizing? If this is happening every year all the time, how can we address that?
So, you know, similar, like I'm a little bit skeptical, which sometimes makes it hard for me to come to, an understanding on subjects or kind of go like, oh, wow, that's actually the solution. So I was pretty skeptical of the UV lights initially. And I was
Hmm.
like, do these even work? And there was a home that we had treated and had all the air conditioning units replaced at the same time. It was a massive home and there was 5 units. And out of the five, well, every single one of them got these purifying devices, like whole home purifying devices that plug into the box that sits on the air handler.
Hmm.
And that was a good move. And then, but out of the five, two of them did not get a UV light uh, right next to the blower wheel. So the UV will actually kill microbial life. Whatever it's hitting or touching, it will basically just break it down and destroy it. So out of the two units that didn't get that UV light on the blower wheel, which is a thing that spins really quickly and distributes the cold air throughout the house, um, it was infested. It was overgrown with mold within 2 years. Literally, we handled the home in 2019. Within 2021, we're getting called back, and the two units that didn't get the UV light were full of mold and then distributing it out throughout the master bedroom and also the theater room. So at that moment in time, I was like, wow, these UV lights are actually really important and something that you need to stay on top of. So yes, getting a purifying device that plugs into the plenum, but having a UV light minimally on the blower wheel and potentially one on the coils as well is going to help to prevent that microbial life from starting to form in your unit. And I hate to say it, but in many cases, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But there are actions that you can take to prevent it. And then the other aspect that might kind of knock it out of the park in terms of preventing it is hooking up like a whole home dehumidifier to your HVAC system, because that's going to pull that water out of the air and drain it outside. So it makes it so the airflow throughout your unit and your ducts it's much drier. So the mold doesn't have enough water droplets to start growing and forming in the first place.
Hmm. Okay. I've heard a lot of people say sometimes, "Oh, I'm just going to get my ducts cleaned." I mean, is that helpful? Does that not really address the root of the issue?
It's a great question, and it's one of these things that there's conflicting information on.
Hmm.
So duct cleaning alone to me is a mistake. I think that just doing duct cleaning, you are, because mold is a living, breathing organism. So when you attack it or you agitate it, it goes into defense mode, just like any living, breathing organism. You attack a dog, it's going to bite you. You go,
Hmm.
step in a snake pit and start stomping, you're definitely going to get bitten. So similarly, if you go in and you have a bunch of mold in your ducts, that's number one, it's already been releasing mycotoxins and spores that entire time. So how do you address what's inside the building envelope and where the ducts are actually impacting, that is leaving its mark, if you will? But how do you address that? And not only that, now you're going to agitate it and stir it up. So what do? Well, the best solution always is remove and replace. That is always the best solution. But at times, economically, it might not be feasible to replace all the ducts. So what do? Well, number one, you want to do a whole home, like you want to address the entire building envelope and all the machinery that goes along with it. So I would say you would do coil cleaning, you would do blower wheel cleaning, you would do a plenum refresh, you would brush the ducts, you would sanitize the ducts with a product that breaks down mold spores and mycotoxins, and then you would do a whole home sanitization as well with a similar non-toxic product that actually will break down mycotoxins and spores. And then to top it off, you would do like a full HEPA and wipe down of the surfaces and contents. And some of that might be economically unfeasible, but some of that you can do on your own with the proper products after the professionals have handled what you're not going to have the equipment and whatnot to handle. Like, let the professionals handle the more difficult stuff, but with the cleaning aspect of it, anybody can be thorough in cleaning. So you would take a microfiber rag and use a product like Decon 30, which is a thyme oil, or potentially like a white vinegar, or a concentrated vinegar. The vinegar helps to break down the actual spore itself, right? Or you can even use like a Dawn dish soap, which is with an antimicrobial as well on the wipe down. And using ideally you would use like a HEPA vacuum, which is high efficiency particulate air filter, and not just a HEPA vacuum that like attaches to a shop vac and then you put a HEPA filter, but like a real HEPA vacuum. It's a smart investment for any home, especially with people who have sensitivities to mold, to make sure that those allergens and indoor contaminants are actually removed.
Okay. If I lived in Florida, I would 100% hire you guys. So before we get to the cleaning part, someone needs to test and search for mold in their home, right? So a lot of times people want to go the cheap route, and that is just
Of
trying to
course.
order like a random at-home kit. And I see problems with that, but I'd love for you to explain, like, why is it so important for a professional to come and test and search for mold versus someone just doing a kit at home by themselves? Or is there a time and place for somebody to use some sort of at-home kit?
Well, this is what I'll tell you. I have never seen a better inspector than a mom, right? The mother's intuition and a mother trying to protect her children is like some of the best inspection that's ever going to take place, because she's going to look through every nook, cranny, crevice, and inch of that home. Now, where does the professional come in? The professional, and what I will say is that sometimes you can hire a professional who does not have a health centric leaning, and they're more what we would say just like people that go and put a like a pump, which is what basically they are. They're almost like a little suction pump that pulls air through this machine, and then it's called a spore cassette or spore trap. Which, interesting enough, the spore traps don't pick up mycotoxins. So you can have mold that is releasing mycotoxins, and the mycotoxin is small enough to get through the gap, and the spores might be heavier, so they're on the ground, but you actually do have a toxic substance that you're inhaling. So the spore traps are not a great measurement. They're about 70% inaccurate. So the inspector goes in and puts a pump in the middle of the room and sends it off to the lab says, oh, there's no problem here, which is exactly what happened in my room. I did that and I thought I was clean, but sure enough, no, there's actually a problem hidden behind the walls, because it's a snapshot in time. So you need to make sure that your inspector is health centric and understands that you might want to do like cavity samples where you actually get a little tube and you connect that to the pump, and you drill a little hole into the wall and you're testing behind the walls,
Mm.
or most importantly, knowing what to look for and where to look, like where are the different hot spots and because you can have a colony of mold on the side of furniture that is a white mold that you don't even see. It's like almost like a film. And if you don't hit it with with a light in a certain direction, you can miss it entirely. Or it
Mm.
can be, I remember one home that I went into where the lady had chronic headaches for migraines that were like debilitating for 2 years. And she
Mhm.
couldn't figure out what was going on. And she asked me to take my shoes off when I came into the house, which I had obviously no problem with, which was such a good move because when I walked into her master bedroom, the carpet felt just a little tiny bit wet. I was
Mm.
like, that's interesting. So then I looked under the bed and she had these wooden slats and she had a full colony of aspergillus underneath her bed. Right.
Oh my
So
gosh.
she had the slab, which is like 4 to 6 inches, if the vapor barrier below it has deteriorated, or if the contractor didn't put a vapor barrier in the first place, that concrete will pull moisture from the ground, from the earth, capillary action, and you can have a moisture, and then the carpet is creating like almost like a sponge. So that humidity level can be high enough in the room that mold will
Mhm.
start growing at 60% humidity. And if there's
Mm.
not proper ventilation, preventing the mold from, actually setting up a colony, if there's not enough airflow, then you can get, and once it starts growing and growing exponentially faster, right? Because it's releasing more and more spores and it's got a nice environment. So that's exactly what took place there. So, it's definitely knowing where to look and what to look for, I think is the most important thing. And then using a series of tests, like a panel of tests, air sampling, direct sampling, and potentially even doing like there's different tests that test for mycotoxin and the historical data of the home, like the dust test is a great
Mm.
one that tests for mycotoxins, and I think you can find that on the dusttest.com. But there's other tests like the ERMI, the HERTSMI, the EMA, that are more sensitive type tests that are also more expensive and they take longer to develop. But if you think about it from the perspective of you're about to go on a journey of healing, this could be debilitating. You're going to be paying for treatments that in a lot of cases are not cheap and they're not inexpensive. Spend the money up front to find out and make sure that your home is safe and healthy. And if it's not, what it's going to take to actually get it to that spot, get it back to a safe and healthy home.
Mhm. This is such good information for people. But it's a lot. So if you guys are in Florida, so obviously if people are in Florida, they can access you. But if somebody doesn't live in Florida and they're trying to find a mold inspector, are there certain questions that they can ask over the phone to make sure that when these people come, they're going to do some of these things?
Sure. Number one, I would ask like, okay, good. Can you tell me what your inspection entails? What is it? Can you walk me through your process? What are you going to do?
Hmm.
So, um, I would ask them if they understand mycotoxins and ask them to name a few: ochratoxin A, centrin, trichothecene. See if they actually even understand what a mycotoxin is. You know, um, do they have? I think that the personal experience and having you or one of your loved ones go through mold exposure or mold toxicity can make a difference in terms of being thorough. But just because somebody is saying that doesn't necessarily mean that they're legit. Because I've run
Mm.
into people, and unfortunately, talk about their experience, and they're going to be providing, like mold-free homes for people that are going through this. And
Mm,
then we've gone and done inspections, for the client because they're still not healing in those homes. And they had a lot of mold. And it was like
mm,
really kind of disheartening to see that people might do that, that they're taking advantage of people that really are going through a difficult time, needing to heal, and putting them in a home that they're not going to ever heal because it's full of, various different species of mold,
mm,
so you're looking for that care factor, that sincerity, that knowledge, the understanding of mycotoxins, mold exposure. Are they thorough? I think that that's probably your most important indicator. And also you yourself holding them accountable for, okay, are you going to be doing direct sampling? Are you going to be doing air samples? What about mycotoxin tests? But also realize that if they're charging you like 350, they're probably not going to be the inspector that you want, especially if you're on a
mm,
journey of healing, because the amount of time, effort, energy that goes into it, plus the cost of the developing of the tests, you're looking at a bit more of a pricey, um, tests or inspector, to be honest with you. Like if it's between 750 and 1,000, you're probably, in a range of somebody who is fairly competent. But some of the best ones, the best inspectors, like we have a company here in Tampa, like certified mold assessors, they're, you know, usually 2 to 3K on a normal house, but they're usually there for the full day and they're doing a host of sampling. And there's also Brian Carr with We Inspect. I mean, these guys are
mm,
not cheap, right? But they are
mhm,
extremely thorough. So you want to, and I think that one of the key things that will give you an idea as to whether or not you have a proper inspector is how many questions are they asking you before they start their process. Because
mhm.
before those inspectors even come out to your house, they're usually doing like a 30-minute to an hour interview of you, trying to get the history of the home, trying to get an understanding of what has taken place in your home. So at Mold Solutions, like we offer a free environmental consultation, but this is really a cursory sort of overview. But in many ways, it's actually even better than what you would get from a normal inspector because we are constantly handling mold. So we know where to look and we know where to find it. So although we won't use the actual sampling and we push that out to other inspectors to do the sampling, we can do because in Florida you can't do the inspection and then do the remediation on the same home. It's considered to be a conflict of interest,
Oh,
so, and there's a number of states that have a similar arrangement where you can't do the testing and you can't do the remediation. But what we can do is a free environmental consultation or like a water damage assessment where we're going and looking at different places where there might be water intrusion. We're using meters like moisture meters, we're using thermal imaging to check for water intrusion issues. And then if we find stuff that is concerning or suspicious, then we would have a independent mold inspector sample that so we get an idea of what species it is, how much
mm,
is there, what's going on. But in many ways, because we've been trained on that thoroughness, it helps us to find it. And it's to me, a superior system. But to answer your question, what do you look for? Somebody who's going to be thorough, somebody who's asking you a lot of questions, somebody who understands mycotoxins, somebody who understands the health aspect of mold, and is I've had old school inspectors. Like, I can't even believe this. This was one inspector that we started to use, and we're like, hey, you didn't open up the AC system and test the HVAC for
mhm.
mold. Why would we? Every system in Florida has mold. It's usually there. So, the EPA doesn't even recommend it. And we're like, uh, that mold cladosporium is toxic. It releases a mycotoxin. It can cause a host of physical problems. So you just brush it off because some alphabet agency is saying, oh, don't test for it or it's not a big deal. Like, I'm sorry, who do you work for?
Mhm.
You work for the client, and you work to make sure that their home is as safe and healthy as possible. So you got to find people that, and there was a inspector that I had run into early on where there was mold on the vents, and he was like, oh yeah, that's normal, that's no big deal. And it was that same mold, it's cladosporium. I'm like, normal? Just because the common cold is normal doesn't mean it's fun to experience, and it's not going to impact your health. And you take
Mhm.
actions to keep yourself healthy and immune to it. So it's really, what is the mindset of the person that you're dealing with, and where are they at, what's their purpose for what they're doing, and
Okay.
understanding it's a big deal.
Yeah, yeah. This is incredible information. You just mentioned something that reminded me of my next question, which is there any level of mold or any type of mold that would be considered safe by your guys' standards?
So I'm gonna say, like, there's no mold that is a good mold to have
Uh-huh.
in your home,
Okay.
right? That's number one. Are there some molds that are considered to be more toxic than others?
Uh-huh.
Considered, yes, like Stachybotrys, which is the black mold, Chaetomium, which, there's molds that might have more poisonous substances. But for example,
Mm.
Cladosporium for many years has been classified as like an allergenic mold, which means you have allergenic, pathogenic, toxic. Well, we just recently found out that through, a research project where we're kind of going into, like, Google Scholar documents, and oh, guess what? Cladosporium actually does release a mycotoxin, and some of the problems that it can create could be life-threatening. Oh, and this has been classified as an allergenic mold.
Mhm.
Man, we are so missing the boat. And I think that realistically, it's important for your listeners and for anybody truly to understand that I think that we're in the infancy stages of the understanding of the problems that mold can create. I think it's probably because because the homes are getting tighter and more energy efficient, and they breathe less, so we're getting less
Mm.
fresh air makeup, right? And we're kind of recycling contaminated air. It's going to be more and more of a problem. Not to mention the materials that we're building with is different. Like
Mhm.
plaster, mold does not like plaster as much as it likes drywall, right? There's a pH balance different between plaster and drywall, and it loves drywall.
Mm.
But just because, for example, I saw many homes and buildings in the UK that had stone, and there was mold growing on the stone. There was enough moisture coming through, and the dampness was there that it's growing on stone, because what happens is it creates a biofilm, which is dirt, dust, other organic matter, hair, skin cells, etc. And it will start colonizing on that biofilm on the surface. And you walk into the area, and it's, sure enough, it's musty. And then you start looking, and it's got a bunch of mold, So yeah, it's an interesting thing for sure, in terms of knowing how important the subject is and where we're at in the infancy stages. So, are there certain molds that are more toxic than others? Yes. What are the safe levels? Because it is also true that every home is going to have some mold spores. So
Mm.
you can go, every home has mold. Well, there's colonized mold, there's mold spores, and then there's the mycotoxins that the colonized mold produces. So
I see.
So, will every home have some mold spores? Yes, we open doors and sometimes we open windows, which is not a good idea if you're in a humid climate, right? Because
Mm.
that humid air with the mold spores will rush into your home. And then if they get enough dampness, they can start colonizing. But yes, there will be some levels of mold spores. Now, they've used the yardstick. Well, if there's more mold spores outside, then there's more mold spores inside, then that's normal fungal ecology. I'm like, this is insanity. You can have 10,000, 15,000 aspergillus penicillium per cubic meter outside and 5,000 inside. And if you have 5,000 aspergillus penicillium mold spores inside your home, I'm sorry, you're going to get sick, you're going to get headaches, and you're going to have a problem.
Mhm.
So, the yardstick that I go off of is per an agency called Normie, which is a national organization of remediators and mold inspectors. And they have like, there's zero tolerance mold spores, which are considered water damage mold. Like they have enough moisture from a leak, a drip, some sort of water intrusion issue. Like Stachybotrys needs 90% moisture content to start growing, similar with like Chaetomium. And then you have mold spores that are considered to be dry mold, that they can start growing at 60% relative humidity. Those are two different things, right? Moisture content and relative humidity are two different things. Relative humidity is the amount of water droplets in the air. Moisture content is the actual amount of moisture in the material itself. So you can have wood decaying fungi that starts growing at about 20% moisture content, which means it's wet. It means it's
Oh.
wet, and you might not even touch it and feel that it's wet, but it's wet enough that mold or fungus will start growing in that material.
Hmm.
Where dry molds will start growing with just humidity alone at over 60% humidity. Now, if you're under like 500 on PNASP, you're probably in an okay zone, but for somebody who's sensitive, that might not, you might just throw that datum right out the window. Okay. And then you have the overall spore count, which would be like over 2,000 is considered, high, or, you start kind of going over 2,000 on the overall spore count in the house, 2,500. But if you start hitting 10,000 on the overall spore count, it's definitely high. But again, this is all based off of air sampling information, which might be completely inaccurate because it might not be happening at that moment in time. So what's the most
Mm-hmm.
important test? The people test, the person test. How does the person feel in their home?
Mm-hmm. Wow. It's sad that we're using worse and worse quality materials too. It would be great if we got to a place where, as we built homes, we implemented like UV lights and things and all of the AC systems, and eventually moved to a place where we think about that as we're building every single home. That would be incredible. Do
Yeah,
you
there's
think
a
we'll ever
book.
get there?
No, I don't. Unfortunately, I mean, look, the more and more regulations is kind of can be, suffocating to some
Mm-hmm.
degree. But really, what is the most important thing? It's empowerment of the individual, and the individual, finding that knowledge that's going to help him live a safe and healthy life. So and once you start on that journey, I think your eyes, you start awakening to many things that are going on. And I think environmental toxicity is just one of them, and the quality of the material that we're using is one of them. And the different avenues that we can take to have a more mold free and less toxic home, and the different tools that are available to us to ensure that takes place, whether it's air purification, whether it's dehumidification, whether it's cleaning habits and patterns. If you want to reduce this to the most simplest sort of important datum of all, if you want a mold-free home, keep it clean and dry.
Mm-hmm.
That's your most simplest, like, mold-free home. If it's clean and dry, the chances of it being moldy are very minimal. So then you have to start thinking, well, where is it not dry? Well, the HVAC system is constantly wet. So how do I put a dehumidifier onto my AC system? Or where do I get a dehumidifier that I can have in the home to keep us, around 50% on the relative humidity? Because
Mm.
you don't want it too dry, because then it can dry out, your, you know, nasal passage and things along those lines, So like if it's under 30% on the relative humidity, you can get sick from that in itself, So there's like a window that you want to be at, really between like 30% and 50% on the relative humidity. So then you also have to have the little hygrometers, or the meters that are detecting relative humidity in your home. And then you don't want to get too, crazy about it, where it's like, oh my God, we're at 65% relative humidity, we're going to have mold. No, every bathroom hits over 90%, 100% relative humidity every day after you shower. It's a matter of, do you dry it out? Is it drying out and it's not staying wet? So that's
Mhm.
also a key element, is knowing that, hey, don't let it sit with a lot of humidity, because then the mold has a chance to start germinating and spreading its roots and start growing.
Mhm. Okay. So for people who want to prevent mold in their home, look into getting a dehumidifier, staying around 50% humidity. Also, you need the hydrometers to look at the humidity. And then would you add anything else, or also maybe adding in like adding the UV lights and that type of stuff to the air ducts?
Absolutely. And look, I'll make it because this is a lot. I'm sure it's a little bit of a, fire hose
Yeah.
type thing, and I'm sorry for that because I'm a little bit passionate about the subject. But to break it down, you can actually, your listeners can go to moldebook.com,
Hmm.
moldebook.com, and there's a free download for its 15 tips for preventing mold in a humid climate. And it could be useful for any climate, really, in terms of gleaning, after going through over, 3,500 homes in Tampa Bay and kind of finding the cause of the mold that exists in these homes, what actions can we take to prevent mold? And then also what actions, we don't really get too into what do you do once you find it, because really it's not a do it yourself project in many cases, but the prevention aspect of it really is something that if you're educated and you're armed with knowledge, you can, do a lot to prevent mold from infiltrating. Now, if something happens where, let's say you have a toilet that overflows or your HVAC unit overflows, then you really want to make sure that you get a professional dry out team to your house, spend the money, if needed, or, in some case you might need to file an insurance claim, but you got to make sure it's properly dried out. And, that the meters are being used to make sure that it's dry, because dry to the eye and touch doesn't mean that it's necessarily dry. So this little booklet, this pamphlet, in terms of preventing mold in a humid climate, mold-free living, is, I think, really a valuable resource for your listeners who want to make sure that they keep their home as mold free as possible.
Okay, that's such a great resource. We will put that in the show notes so everybody can just go to the show notes and click that and grab it. I want to make sure we touch on a couple more, or at least one more big misconception about mold and cleaning up mold, which I've heard a lot of people try and put bleach on mold. Can you tell us why that is not a good idea?
Well, first off, whether it's bleach or any product for that
Hmm.
matter, what you're doing is you're basically agitating the colonized mold. And by agitating it, you're creating a situation where it's actually going to aerosolize that mold. It's going
Hmm.
to go into a mold explosion. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to, and bleach is, toxic in itself, right? There's a toxicity aspect to it. There's a lot of water in bleach, which mold loves. And yes, it may take the color out of the mold, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's breaking it down. You
Hmm.
know, the best solution with mold is always removal of the actual colonization, right? So you got to find the mold, and then, but most importantly, take it a step further, find the source of what's causing it. So you'll get your landlords that are like, oh, here's some bleach and some kills, right? You just bleach it, paint over it, and they've literally just trapped the spores, but may not have handled the water source, and now it's growing behind the paint, growing behind the wall. The number of times that we've removed like wallpaper and found a tremendous amount of mold behind the wallpaper, I can't even tell you. So it's really bleach or any other product, you're really, all you're doing is taking like a stick and poking a hornet's nest. So
Hmm.
if you're allergic to hornets, that could be deadly. If you are not allergic to hornets, it's not going to feel good at the end of the day. And sometimes the thing that I think is a huge misconception is if somebody is not getting a reaction, well, mold doesn't bother me. Well, maybe acutely it doesn't bother you,
Mm.
but when you're talking about Alzheimer's, dementia, cancer, Parkinson's, or things that are more slowly developing issues that have not been cured yet, well, that's a good sign right there that maybe they don't understand what's causing the problem in the first place. You know, that, oh, mold doesn't bother me. I don't know that that's actually the case, you know. And if somebody's like, well, mold can't have that kind of an impact, that's ludicrous that mold can have an impact on your health, right? I point out, okay, if you were to take LSD, does that have an impact on you? Yeah, you trip, and you trip hard. Well, where does LSD come from? A mold called ergot. That's what LSD is derived from, a mold. How about if you take a bunch of magic mushrooms? How do you feel afterwards? Oh, I'm tripping. I mean, it may be good. Okay, so that type of mold, right? Guess what? That's a fungus. You know, how about the one that makes a ton of money and sells everywhere? You know, alcohol. What is that? It's fermentation, right? It's yeast, right? It's a fungus. So these are things that have the potentiality, right? These molds have the potentiality of having a huge impact on the way you feel physically. And in some cases, it may make you feel okay or good for a second, and then you don't feel great afterwards, right? So I would really like to dispel the concept of people not being impacted by mold and come to realize that maybe there's a ton of information that we don't have in terms of the impact that mold can have on us and our physical and mental well-being.
Very good points. And I think this is a good place to wrap up. Unless you had any other final things that you have to get out to the public.
I mean, look, I was listening to some of the things that you were talking about, right, in regards to your journey and, you know, having sports induced asthma. And then you tell me that you lived in Florida, right? So I'm like, could be a connection there, right?
Yeah, definitely. You could be onto something there. Are you open to doing a speed round?
Sure, absolutely, 100%.
Okay, amazing. First thing that comes to your head. Don't stress about it. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Yeah, I say flying. I don't know why, but the concept, if I'm dreaming and I can fly, you know, you can get to places that, you know, you normally can't get to really fast. And I think that makes a difference. I think the speed in which you can move and make things happen determines how successful you are. That's a huge thing for me. The speed of particle flow alone determines power.
I love that. What's your favorite hobby?
I would say photography is probably the thing that I love to do the most. And that's kind of ironic that I deal with something so nasty. But, you know, the beauty that comes along with photography, I love it. I did the New York Institute of Photography course. And second would be snowboarding.
Oh, fun. What's the best purchase you made in the last year that cost you under $100?
AirPods, I guess. And that might be just a little bit above because you
It's
can actually
close.
hear people, you know. I think the ability to communicate makes a huge difference in our lives. So having clarity and communication and having noise reduction allows me to be present with that person in front of me.
What are 1 to 2 impactful books that you've read?
Geez, I would say Rich Dad, Poor Dad is probably a really good one. And one of the things the line that, you know, really stands out to me is the difference between being an employee and owning your own business is the difference between walking and flying. And I can say that that's true, right? Like if you really want to start empowering yourself, you're going to have to be willing to have the courage to not do the 9 to 5 thing. And then second would probably be the 10X rule, right? Because with Grant Cardone, because it just starts pushing. Like, I don't think there's any way that I'm where I'm at today if it wasn't for that book, because some of the hurdles and obstacles that I've had to overcome in the last 7 years, and especially in the last 2.5 years, would not have been possible if I didn't have the courage and understanding that that book helped me to develop.
That's incredible. And final one, if you could leave the listeners with one tip that they could implement this week to help them live a healthier, happier life, what would that be?
Make sure that your environment is as safe as possible. Your building envelope is something that you're going to be living in at least 8 hours a day, if not more. So do your homework, do your research, empower yourself, find out what are the things that can actually bring about a more toxic home to protect you and your loved ones. Because I don't care what anybody says, the big agencies don't have the care factor that you have for your own family and for your kids and for yourself. So you have to empower yourself and do not rely on the authorities that are pushing and approving things that can be truly damaging to your health and saying it's okay. Don't believe that. Find people like you that are giving out information that are more aligned to, like, let food be thy medicine, or find, if you have disease, it's my belief that you're either getting too much of something that you shouldn't be, or you're not getting enough of something that you really need. And and those things would make a huge difference in terms of your overall health and longevity and happiness and well-being.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. You're going to share where people can find you, how people can work with you, and kind of the area that you guys work in as well.
Sure, we're in Tampa Bay. That's really our primary location, but we love helping. We have traveled. We've traveled as far away as California, Virginia, Tennessee. We've definitely traveled to help people. Especially if they're looking for a health-centric mold remediation company that does understand indoor air quality as a priority. In terms of where they can find us and find a lot of great tips and, potentially be entertained by some cute little kids as well. Because my kids, I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, they help us, with the business, and, they understand that they have a role to play as well. But mold.solutions. So we do a lot of tips. My wife is a key component to the business. So she's helping on the social media creativity. So it's mold.solutions. Also Facebook. It might be Mold Solutions USA on Facebook or something like that, but Mold Solutions. And then our website is moldsolutions.com, and that gives you all of our links as well. So we love being in communication and, replying to people that are looking for some help. We're here to serve and we're here to help. That's really, I think, if you're in the service industry, it's something that you really need to understand, that you're there to help people and serve people.
Absolutely. Well, we'll put all that in the show notes, and thank you again for coming on and giving so much valuable information. I honestly really, really enjoyed this episode and really appreciated it.
Absolutely. Look, I love what you're doing and, the type of content that you're putting out there. So I'm honored to be on your show. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like this video and comment, letting me know what you enjoyed and what you want to see more of. Also, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you get alerts when new content is coming out and you don't miss any videos. And just a quick reminder that this information is for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness or medical condition. Please consult with a qualified healthcare professional before making any changes to your diet, exercise routine, supplements, or medical treatment. If you're looking for a functional medicine practitioner, please reach out to me. And thank you again for watching, and keep striving to become your healthiest, happiest self.